Well, welcome everyone. And my name is Chris Sawchuk. I'm a principal and I lead the Global Procurement Advisory Practice at the Hackett Group. One of the things when I flew in here, you're talking about people coming from far away. I came from Tampa, Florida, so not as far, and I know Marc is not much closer than me. I'm on the West Coast, so a little bit farther from myself, I believe. But I was thinking in a digital procurement world, and as I was thinking about this whole thing, it really epitomizes, everything that, you start thinking about the growing digital environment within our companies. This event, that occurred and started, back in 2019, really epitomizes that whole environment. Many of us as companies, we've invested in technology. And the reason that we invest in that technology is to meet an objective. Whether that objective is something to reduce costs in our environment, reduce risk, to improve better insight. But some of you, and I may be dating myself a little bit here, is if you went back about a little over 30 years ago, there was a movie out there called The Field of Dreams. Anybody recall that movie, Kevin Costner? And there's a famous line that Kevin talked about in that movie, and it's, build it and they will come. You remember that? Just the idea that all of the players, you just build it. Unfortunately, that's not the environment that we live in procurement. The idea of building technology environments and, all of a sudden, all of our stakeholders will come and engage in that technology just has not manifested itself in our environment. And so today, that's the challenge that we want to talk about here on stage, is that adoption of that technology. Obviously we have a lot of stakeholders in that technology, both internal and the supplier. And today's conversation is really about that supplier and having them engage in that technology. So to share some insights in this particular area, not only into understanding the context of the problem and why it's been around for so long, but also how we can solve it as well, I'm joined by three panelists today. Marc, we had a switch because originally I think some of you said we were expecting Paula, but Marc came, and Marc is from J&J, heads up technology procurement for J&J. We have Costas, who is the founder and CEO of HICX. And then we also have Patrick. And Patrick, your title is a little bit longer because you have a whole list of responsibilities. Head of Procurement Strategy, Transformation, Insights, and Enablement at Roche. So let's start with a key question. And this is really, I just like to frame the whole issue and challenge around supplier enablement. And Marc, I'd like to start with you. Why is it so difficult to do this? And why has it been such a problem for so long for our organizations?
Well, I think it starts with, in the past, we've been giving a lot of attention to our customers and, not as much as to our suppliers. And it is just as important to really put the supplier at the same level to be able to have a great partnership with them. And I think bringing them, we're starting to see a lot of change into bringing that, because creating that two-way communication with our suppliers really is going to be beneficial to both of them. And that's been a challenge at all levels. It has been a challenge internally, and as well as, how do you build that relationship with a supplier? What are the means that you bring to the table to be able to create that? And I think there's a richness of data exchange, of partnership and collaboration that benefits both parties. I think that's something that's very important.
Okay. Patrick, what are your thoughts? I mean, is it similar? I know you're in a different industry,
I think,
to some degree.
Maybe a bit more controversial answer. I don't think that we even have focused on our customers really that much. I think we've built technology and procurement tools for procurement. We've asked our customers, our internal stakeholders, for commodity codes, for spend numbers, for all these things that they can't care less about. And I think just more recently, we start to realize, maybe we should ask them stuff they really care about, and maybe we should design our tools in a user-friendly way that they actually start to like us, and that drives internal adoption. But I think we haven't yet really focused on the supplier as another critical stakeholder. And I think COVID, for example, or other situations we are facing these days show us if we don't focus on our suppliers, that's a stakeholder we lose, and we don't get what we want from them. And therefore, I think we have to start focusing more. And last thought, I think in terms of technology, we need to build technology that focuses on both, almost connects the experience for our internal stakeholders and our supplier partners. Because just having two different versions of the same thing or two different tools that do great stuff for both, I think doesn't help us. So we have to have both experiences in mind with the tools and technology we use.
It's interesting. I want to say one thing. There's several years ago, or actually just a few years ago, we did a study, and we were just looking at, what are the, when you look at supplier adoption, what are some of those things that are really driving it? What are the most important objectives? Number one was cycle time. It was speed. But to your point, it was when we ask you, supplier experience was in there, customer experience or internal stakeholder experience, that superseded, was above the focus on the supplier. And supplier was further down. So it's sort of been, not only has it been from an objective standpoint, it has been a lower priority in terms of engaging them in the technology.
Yeah, but a great example, sorry to build this very quickly, if you have a computer that's super fast, best of anything, and you have no software, no content on it, it's worth nothing.
Right.
And when you then start building the software for the end user to do whatever in Excel, fantastic, great step forward. But if you forget about the data, the stuff that comes from supplier, again, unusable. So bring all of the three things together, I think for me personally is the answer, back to your example, right? Don't list one higher or lower, they need to come together.
Yeah. Costas, your thoughts. I mean, you have a different perspective, looking at lots of different industries, lots of different companies. Do you agree? Do you disagree? I mean, what are some of the things that you're seeing when it comes to this challenge that's been around for so long?
So it's cross industries, right? So, and what actually has happened, think about DPW, we're here, there's so many digital services. I don't like calling it best of breed anymore. I think there's lots of digital services, and we all agree we're never going to land on one. I think that boat has sailed. No one is challenging that because we focus on experience. That's why we want, best of breed, right? But this is creating a challenge for suppliers, if you think about it, because they have many customers. So there is some kind of data entry problem at the same time, which is also going on. And to do this, you kind of have to bring the supplier on the journey with you. The way you think about adoption and change management within your organization, all these services now are connecting with the supplier. You have to try and bring that supplier on the journey, right? And that's why a focus on supplier experience is something which we see now coming to the forefront, right? It's also why, if you think Make Tech Work with DPW, we launched Supplier Experience Live to build a community which is really focusing on how do we solve this for suppliers? Because I also remind our customers, we're customers, but Roche and J&J are also a supplier to someone. So if you flip it around, at the same time, you're all suppliers as well, right? So solving this also is in everyone else's interest.
Yeah. Let me ask you this, as you think about, we're talking about the suppliers and this problem. When you think about it from the supplier perspective, what is the pain? Why is it so difficult for them? Why is there so much pain for the supplier to engage in these technologies? And Patrick, maybe I'll start with you, because you highlighted is if we can get them on there, right, we have a great environment because we have everybody collaborating in this environment internally, through the technology, and externally. And we know that if that doesn't happen, we're never going to realize the objectives that we had for that technology solution. So what is the pain? If I'm sitting here as a supplier and I want to get it, why is it so difficult? What is the pain that they're experiencing?
So I think I want to build on what Costas says. I think many of the activities, processes, initiatives, anything that we do, start ultimately with the supplier in execution mode, once we've operationalized what we came up with. And I think that lens, we just don't think about. We do projects, luckily not anymore just for procurement, out of procurement, but for the business. But I think this thought of the supplier and that lens is often still forgotten. A good example is everyone talks about ESG and sustainability at the moment. Everyone wants to collect lots of data. But are we speaking to each other? Likely not so much as we should. But take the lens of the supplier. They soon receive 1,000 different forms from many, many different companies with technically the same stuff, but we haven't really aligned. So what you mentioned, standardization, community, that stuff is so important, not only so that we guys talk and have fun, but actually we need to talk with our suppliers. What do you want? How we can make your life easier, because that will help us to maybe show greater savings, greater efficiency, and drive adoption. Yeah, I think that's the lens, the perspective we have to take. Not only procurement, not only business, but actually the critical partner, the second pair in this equation, which is the supplier. And that's not happening yet as much as it should, in my opinion.
Well, it's more of I think what you're describing is more of a stakeholder-centric view, designed from the outside in. And I think, in some ways, and I've been in this space for too long, and, you look at it in many ways, we built and we pushed out. We never designed from the stakeholder. You're right, exactly. How do we design something through the lens of the folks that are going to be, engaging in that solution on a go-forward basis? Yeah. Marc.
I think you said it well at the beginning. We used to be, or we're still in some cases, we build it and then they will come. Yeah. But we don't ask them what do they want, what would they like them to build? Yeah. And be hand in hand building it. And I think we're starting to see the shift, and making that experience, I think, is going to be super important. It's sitting together just as your internal stakeholders, your external stakeholders sit at the same table, and we design it together and really start driving that personification. Let it be, depending on the category, depending on, whatever the business you're doing, and you give them that choice and create it together. And I think that drives a lot, and a lot of sharing, collaborating.
Yeah, yeah. And I know you talked about the standardization, just making it easier on the suppliers, not having 1,000 different customers coming to them to adopt. Costas, your perspective, again, from a technology provider focusing on this pain, what are you seeing?
Look, I want to build on what Marc said, and I think Marc also means segmentation now becomes very important to drive adoption, and you need to think about it ahead of time. What we've seen in a lot of projects, it's, as Patrick says, kind of an afterthought, and then you're realizing basic things to make it work, like, am I contacting the right person from the supplier to give us this feedback? Is it tailored to their needs? Oftentimes, it's a one-size-fits-all, and this, of course, are quick wins, but that's going to drive a very poor experience for them because they don't understand, right? And who was it? It was Heineken from Ruth shared at Supplier Experience Live this question, which they ask, I think, in an RFP. Do you tell us about your greenhouse gases? And the supplier responded, "Oh, we don't have any greenhouses. We're not in the agricultural business." But you make so many assumptions as a customer. Right, it's a simple thing, but it's not thinking of, are they going to understand what I'm asking? So I think there's a lot of basic things around segmentation, around thinking in advance, tailoring content, which can be quick wins, which can help you having the right data as well. Right, it's also what Patrick said. You need all these three things to come together. Yeah. It can't be the accounts payable person, which you have in your ERP or P2P system, and you try and run these campaigns with supplier adoption. For other initiatives, the person from accounts payable doesn't know about ESG and all of these other things, right? Yeah.
Well, I think that, you mentioned, the whole focus on standardization, but I think also fit for purpose is one of the things that, Costas, you were highlighting. Just designing things. I have lots of different suppliers. They all have different levels of risk to me as an organization, and I onboard them into a technology solution. What is that? How do I do it in a much more fit for purpose and hopefully standardized way across multiple organizations?
And I think the other aspect that I mean, talking out of experience and for myself, I think I have been largely ignorant to the core data a supplier provides. And it looks and sounds so transactional, master data or some certain commodity codes they provide, or even their banking information, yeah? Who cares? I do fancy stuff like category management, talk to the business and try to sell them things. But everything will fail if you don't have this data right, or if it doesn't flow through your system correctly. So how do you get this data right? Focus on it and build an experience or the ability for the supplier that they actually enter it correctly. Otherwise, you spend hours, days, millions to fix something upstream you will never fix. Because the first start of the process, which is master data, for example, is incorrect. You're never going to fix your invoicing problems if you don't get a supplier to enter their banking details correctly. And I think I personally have learned this the hard way and have been ignorant to that problem for so long.
Oh, it's interesting, because I think if you went back, and I was having this conversation with somebody a little bit earlier today, and we were talking about agility. Okay, and I mentioned to them, I said, we put out an article, I think it was, covered in Forbes, just talking about 5 characteristics of these world-class organizations in procurement. And one of the things that we highlighted was agility. And I used to ask folks, I said, what do you mean by agility? And, most people would say, well, it's responding, it's doing things quicker, it's all these different types of things. And what they would forget about is sort of the predictive aspect of it as well. In some ways, we got to plan our way into things. But what that led to us to solve the agility that we all knew and agreed that we need to have in an organization is to be digital. And then we got into the digital and we started layering in all this technology. And to your point, we forgot about the data, right? It's sort of like, and again, I mentioned I was in Tampa, and one of the things that, about in Tampa, when the water is really warm, if you get any kind of disturbance out there from a tropical standpoint, you have the ingredients for a massive hurricane. We had the one in the fall. Some of you may, realize it, and it was coming through, and living in Tampa, they were saying, when it gets to the shore, I think it's going to be a Category 1. I'd say there's no way. All we have at all these record high temperatures, it's got the fuel there. And I look at that fuel, is the data that it fuels the applications in a lot of these different types of things. So I think you brought up an excellent point there. So let me go to our final discussion point here. We've talked about the challenges, the context, why it's been around, why is there so much pain for the supplier, et cetera, in this, and what may be causing it, the lack of standards, the fact that, we're asking them, not to fit for purpose. But as you look at it, how do we solve this? Now, some of you have touched on that a little bit, but as we look forward, not just to solve getting them onboarded into the technology solution, but onboarding them in a way that we continue to create a better experience in an ongoing way, more long-term with those suppliers as well. Mark?
Well, one of the things that at least we're attempting is we looked, for example, at all of the jobs that we need to do with the suppliers, let it be in planning, in sourcing, in quality, in R&D, and so on, and looked at all of those, and then we're actually working with them, designing what are the processes that we do. And what are the spaces where we lose a lot of cycle time, where all the data is not correct, and so on. And then little by little, we're bringing it down to, okay, here's what we need to do, and then target the suppliers again through a segmentation, through what are the needs that they have, and be able to start building those jobs to be done. And today, I think one of the elements in the past is the technology was not up to par to really start doing this type of approach. Today, with this, low code or no code, I think it really adapts for us to take that feedback from our suppliers, have the conversation, build it, share it. It doesn't work, adapt it, and move on. And I think that's what's really helping us, at least having those conversations with the suppliers and be able to deliver some of those results.
I think two words. Giving it attention and start investing in it. Yeah. So if you think about your last RFP sourcing procurement technology, what were the questions you asked? Likely focus on analytics, on the sourcing capability, on maybe e-auction, on ChatGPT, all these fancy and great things. But sort of the supplier onboarding, master data questions probably came last, or we're just assumed they work, but actually they don't. Yeah, and that's how many of these technology work. They treat this as a thing that just needs to be there. But think about when you use your analogy, fueling your car. If it was the most horrendous process, you would probably not drive as much, which would be good these days. But you would hate fueling up, yeah? But this is so standardized. It's also so easy to do. And now you've got shops, you can get food, you can get cash, all these things. Actually, to an extent, you start to like it. you may fuel up more. Not good for the environment, but you get my analogy. So make it something that is on your priority list, because it fuels all the other processes upstream. And therefore, I think it needs attention, needs some investment. And it will make many things better upstream.
Yeah. Costas, I mean, you lead a company that's just focusing on a specific area. What are your thoughts?
Look, I think companies have to consider their communication channel, right, and how they communicate with suppliers. If you look for large enterprises, you'll go onto websites and look for supplier portal or information, and you tend to have lots of pages with lists. Hey, if you're in this region, use that tool, and if you're based there and working with this business unit, you do this. That's complex for the supplier, right? But if you could tailor it, segment it, so suppliers would see things which are specific to them in the portal, right? But also teach your organization that, look, we have a portal, that's our communication medium, because oftentimes big organizations, many parts of it touch the supplier, they're not aware of it. Again, we heard another example at Supplier Experience Live. They had the Log4j information security incident a couple years ago. 12 people contacted the same supplier, right, from the organization, because they didn't know, they hadn't established a clear kind of communication challenge. That was obviously poor supplier experience, huge wastage obviously for the organization, and apparently, the company was Microsoft as well, so obviously they would have been acutely aware of the Log4j incidents. I think consider the channel you establish for how you communicate with suppliers. Think about your portal in a different way. It's become a very confused term because everyone developed supplier portals as part of a workflow solution. We have an invoice management. Oh, we have to collect something from the supplier. Let's create a portal. But companies should think of a portal as the same way you think of a customer employee portal, right? It's how I achieve operational scale with my suppliers and really focus the organization internally on a single channel, right? That simplifies a lot of things for the supplier.
Yeah. Let me ask you one other question before we open it up for some audience discussion. How is the supplier going to define success through their eyes? As this experience, all three of you talked about the experience. You talked about various aspects and the pain, et cetera. But if I'm a supplier, how am I going to define success in the enablement of myself into your technology solutions? How are they going to look at it? Who wants to?
Well, I think from the get-go, if you bring them around the table, you're creating that experience both for internal and external. We create the metrics that are going to be valuable to that supplier. Let it be efficiencies. Let it be that they're going to get paid faster, much easier in one click instead of 10 of them, right?
Yeah.
There's going to be a richness of data for them, richness of data for us. So again, it's coming up. And sometimes you might need to tailor it to the different categories, different supplier itself. So if you give them that personalization, you sit with them and drive back value to them, I think that's the important element.
And I think what you're defining is not just the supplier adopting into the technology process, but the ongoing as to why are we doing it.
Yeah. The technology is just an enablement to them getting those efficiencies as part of that. So.
Patrick.
I think it's ease of use and accepting that their success is your success. So if you make them fail, you fail. So make it easy to use. And I think an additional point to build on what Costas said, I think any complexity is just a great source for error and for inefficiencies. So really focus on simple, 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 and take into account who's using that technology in that process. It's not the CEO of the supplier, not the people you speak to. It's someone likely in a shared service center, and your people using it, likely also someone. They're not incentivized nor interested in doing an amazing job. They're just going to get the task done. So if it's complex and not simple, they type in whatever they just feel like. Yeah, and then who lives with the problem? You again. Yeah. And that comes up to management, problem, failure, complexity. So I think that lens again, always simple, 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 and think about how they're going to use it and how do you make it easy for them.
Yeah.
I would add, for me, it's because we're also a supplier, right? We we're on both sides of the coin. It comes down to clarity. If I'm the supplier and things are clear and I'm not confused and I don't have to contact, the customer to find out, this is really all you want, right? Can I really self-serve? If this is possible, you're fine as a supplier. What tends to happen, and I'll give you probably a known example for many people, we have to go and register in Ariba, and you go and do this and you find that there's 50 HICX solutions in Ariba. And now you don't know which 50 is the one for Roche or J&J, and you went to submit your invoice and it didn't go because you connected to the wrong entity. This lack of clarity, so if you have confusion, from a supplier's perspective, that's you want to avoid confusion, right? So if supplier has clarity, this is a great benchmark of the experience, and that also means efficiency internally, right? No one is contacting you to find out how do I do this.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. So who's any questions or discussion points that anyone here would like to engage with the panel on?
Or challenge us.
Anything you disagree with? Or something that you did that's different from what they did?
Doug McLean from Canopy. A couple of specifics. One of our clients asked us to perform, they use a risk platform, I won't mention which one it is, but they asked us to comply with their requirements by registering on this risk platform. So I logged in and I got 200 questions to answer. And the first question was, are you SOC 1 compliant? Which we are, which renders the other 199 questions redundant. So I was thinking, I tick the box and then I don't have to fill in the other 199, but it wasn't a dynamic question. So I had to fill in the 199 questions that followed that were principally redundant, really frustrating. And so, we ourselves, we do supplier onboarding, supplier management, and I think the two things that we've learned that aid supplier compliance is, number one, dynamic question sets. So you only ask, based on a set of rules, relevant questions to the supplier. And then the other is risk-based questions. Because if you're going to be spending 10K with a supplier annually, there's a big difference in risk if you're spending 10 million. And therefore, risk in our system drives the dynamic questions, what you actually want to ask and what's important. And then just finally, don't ask for stuff that you're not going to use or someone in the business is not going to use. Only ask for relevant data points. So many of these systems just ask for irrelevant data points that no one's going to look at it, no one's going to use it, and it has no relevance.
I would absolutely agree with that, but...
We talk about hyper-segmentation, which is similar, I think, to what Doug means, right? You need to go far beyond procurement segmentation and risk. You have to go pretty granular in all these areas, right? Because there's a risk segmentation, there's a performance segmentation, right? With everything, you have to go pretty deep in your segmentation to make the experience successful.
Yeah.
And then another thought to this, I can't agree more. I always make the procurement leadership team or leadership decision makers to use the system they ask their people to design. Because then you quickly realize, oh my God, I don't want to be ever a customer or supplier to this company here, because it's so painful.
Yeah.
So redo it.
Yeah. I think we have time for one last question. We got about 30 seconds. Yeah.
Hey, Misha from Avani. I wanted to ask, it's important to make it easy for the whole ease of use when it comes to the suppliers interacting with the technology, but even if you've made it easy to use, how do you think about then incentives to actually push them along, right? So not only removing all the barriers to use the technology, but then giving them an actual drive to do so.
I think it's something that could be very, very good, and depends on the situation, depends on the supplier, depends on the case, the use case. But it's something that could help. There's always something for both parties, And I think creating an agreement that will benefit both sides as you move along in the relationship, I think it's probably very healthy.
And just to add to that, so again, we talked about supplier marketing at Supplier Experience Live, which, maybe within procurement we don't think about it, but one of the things which came up is, you have to put yourself in the shoes of the supplier and actually think of ideas, right? Can I give them something in return? Figure out what is important to the supplier. So that is a valid point, right? Ultimately, supplier does want to help their customer. But I do think customers can be thinking of, what will the supplier value? Or even things of explaining what's in it for them, right? This can also be done. And it can be more around tailoring the communication, because sometimes we just ask the supplier to do this rather than explaining, there is a benefit also for you as supplier, right? If you help us here, or we could incentivize you in some way. I think that is a great idea and totally in line with the supplier experience, right?
Yeah. Well, thank you. We're at time, and I just want to thank our panel, Costas, Marc, and Patrick. Thank you for your insights.